And what if the United States just proved in broad daylight that those islands aren't as untouchable as Iran spent 50 years believing they were? Before we go any further, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this video reach more people. And trust me, once you understand what's been happening in the Strait of Hormuz over the last 2 weeks, you're going to want to see where this goes. Subscribe too, because this story is moving fast, and I don't want you to miss the next update. Let's set the stage properly, because to understand why this moment matters so much, you need to understand what these islands actually are, and why Iran has treated them like the crown jewels of its entire military strategy for half a century. Picture 3 small chunks of rock sitting in the Persian Gulf. Together, they don't even add up to 10 square miles of land. That's smaller than most mid-sized towns. You could walk across some of them in under an hour. On a map, they barely register. They look like an afterthought, a few dots of land scattered near the mouth of one of the most important waterways on the entire planet. But for Iran, these islands have never been an afterthought. For 50 years, Iranian military planners have treated them as something closer to permanent warships. Not floating ones, obviously. Stationary ones, built out of rock instead of steel, but serving the exact same purpose as an aircraft carrier parked in exactly the right spot. And the spot they sit in happens to be the most valuable piece of ocean real estate in the world, the narrow channel every oil tanker on Earth has to pass through if it wants to move crude out of the Persian Gulf. That channel is called the Strait of Hormuz. It's barely 20 miles wide at its narrowest point, and through that tiny stretch of water flows somewhere between a fifth and a quarter of all the oil shipped by sea across the entire globe. Close that strait, even partially, even temporarily, and you don't just hurt Iran's neighbors. You send a shockwave through gas prices, shipping costs, and energy markets everywhere, from Tokyo to Texas. Iran has understood the value of this choke point for a very long time, and these 3 islands, called Greater Tunb, Lesser Tunb, and Abu Musa, sit almost perfectly positioned to control it. Whoever holds these rocks can, in theory, watch and threaten nearly every ship that tries to pass through. Here's where the story gets a little uncomfortable and a little bit personal for one of Iran's closest neighbors. Back in November of 1971, just 2 days before the United Arab Emirates officially became a country, Iranian naval forces moved in and seized all 3 islands by force. A small group of local police officers defending one of the islands were overwhelmed. Several people were killed in the fighting. And just like that, islands that had never belonged to Iran suddenly did. For more than 50 years since, the UAE has never stopped objecting. Every regional summit, every diplomatic gathering, the UAE brings it up again. And every single time, Iran simply ignores the complaint and keeps building. Over the decades, those 3 islands quietly transformed from empty rock into heavily fortified military positions. Anti-aircraft systems went in, anti-ship missile batteries went in, radar and surveillance equipment went in. By recent years, Iranian commanders were openly boasting that missile systems stationed on these islands could threaten ships anywhere across the entire Persian Gulf, launched from land that Iran seized by force before some of the people reading this were even born. That's what made these islands so strategically important. And that's exactly why the United States decided, just weeks ago, to hit them directly. Now, here's where the story shifts from history into something that feels almost like science fiction. Because the way the American military went after these islands wasn't with a traditional bombing run alone. It involved a level of coordination, technology, and sheer audacity that professional military analysts are already calling one of the more remarkable naval campaigns in modern memory. On a single day in the middle of this month, United States Central Command launched 3 separate waves of strikes against Iran's island network, all within roughly a 15-hour window. The first wave began early in the morning and lasted an hour and a half without pause, hitting coastal missile batteries, storage sites, and launch positions on Greater Tunb, the island Iran has always treated as its most important maritime stronghold at the mouth of the strait. A second wave hit hours later. A third wave struck that same night, targeting command centers, radar stations, and surveillance posts across the islands and along the mainland coast, all at once, deliberately aimed at blinding Iran's ability to track ships moving through the strait in the first place. Think about the logic here for a second, because it's actually brilliant in a cold, calculated way. You can't send a swarm of small attack boats after a tanker if you can't see the tanker coming. By hitting the radar and surveillance systems at the same time as the missile batteries, American planners weren't just destroying weapons. They were trying to make Iran blind and deaf at the exact moment it needed its eyes and ears the most. And there's one more detail that mattered, more than people realized at first. This strike happened during the day, not under cover of darkness, the way most of the earlier operations in this conflict had been carried out. In broad daylight, with visibility for anyone watching, American forces hit these islands anyway. That's not just a tactical choice, that's a message. It says, we don't need to hide anymore. But the island strikes, as dramatic as they were, weren't even the most jaw-dropping part of this campaign. 3 days earlier, something happened at Iran's most important naval base that genuinely changed the conversation around modern warfare. The base is called Bandar Abbas, and it's the heart of Iran's naval operations on the mainland coast. On the 12th of the month, 3 unmanned sea drones built by a company called Saronic, and known as Corsairs, slipped into the harbor at Bandar Abbas without a single human being physically present anywhere near the attack. No pilot in a cockpit. No sailor aboard a support ship nearby. Just autonomous machines gliding across the water on their own, guided by onboard systems, heading straight toward a target that had never expected an attack to come from something so small and so quiet. These drones struck a maintenance facility used for repairing submarines and ships. Footage released afterward showed the view from inside one of the drones as it made its final approach. A maintenance crane, an Iranian submarine hanging out of the water in a repair sling, completely exposed, completely vulnerable. And then the screen simply went dark. Here's the part that should genuinely give you pause. Nobody outside the classified planning rooms has confirmed whether a human operator gave the final order to strike, or whether the drone's own onboard artificial intelligence made that decision by itself. Think about what that means. A machine, operating without a human physically holding a trigger in that final moment, may have made the call to attack a target in an active war zone. That's not a hypothetical from a science fiction movie anymore. That happened in real combat within the last few weeks. And these Corsair drones aren't some small experimental gadget either. In under a year, this program went from an early prototype to a contract worth close to $400 million, with several hundred units already built. Each one can travel roughly 1,000 nautical miles, carry a payload of around 1,000-pound armed worse, and skim across the water with a radar signature so small it's incredibly difficult to detect. Analysts have drawn a direct comparison to the sea drone campaign Ukraine has run against Russia's Black Sea Fleet, a campaign the American military reportedly studied closely before building its own version of the same idea. Let that sink in for a moment. The lessons learned from a war on the other side of the world, thousands of miles away in the Black Sea, are now being applied directly against Iran in the Persian Gulf. Modern warfare doesn't stay contained to one region anymore. Tactics travel fast, and technology travels even faster. Before we go further into what all of this actually means for the bigger picture, let me ask you something. Had you heard about any of this before today? The islands, the autonomous drones, the daylight strikes? Drop a comment and let me know, because I think this is one of the most underreported military stories happening right now, and it deserves way more attention than the surface-level coverage it's been getting. So why did the United States need to go to such extreme lengths in the first place? Why not just handle this with traditional airstrikes and call it a day? The answer comes down to a weapon Iran has spent 40 years perfecting, one that doesn't look impressive on paper, but has caused more disruption to global shipping than almost anything else in this entire conflict. It's often called the mosquito fleet, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Thousands of small, fast attack boats, capable of racing across the water at speeds most people associate with jet skis rather than warships. These boats carry machine guns, rocket launchers, anti-ship missiles, and, in some cases, equipment for laying naval mines. On their own, not one of these boats stands a chance against a proper warship. None of them could realistically sink a fully loaded oil tanker outright. But that misses the entire point of the strategy. Iran doesn't need to sink a single ship to win this fight. It just needs tanker captains and shipping companies to believe there's a real chance their vessel could get swarmed, boarded, or disabled somewhere in that narrow strait. Once insurance companies start pricing in that risk, premiums skyrocket. And once premiums skyrocket high enough, shipping companies simply stop sending vessels through. The strait effectively shuts down, without Iran ever having to win a single traditional military battle. This tactic isn't new. It traces back to the tanker war of the 1980s during the long conflict between Iran and Iraq, when Iran first refined the idea of using small, fast boats to harass and threaten shipping in the Gulf. Over the decades since, the doctrine has only gotten more sophisticated. Modern versions of these attack boats can reach speeds well beyond 50 knots, launching from multiple directions at once in coordinated swarms. Picture 20 or more small boats converging on a single tanker from every angle simultaneously, overwhelming any single ship's ability to defend itself before help can even arrive. In recent years, Iran has added over 200 new combat speedboats to this fleet, with military commanders publicly claiming that newer versions can reach speeds that would have sounded impossible a generation ago. And despite more than a month of sustained American strikes across this conflict, intelligence estimates suggest Iran still retains roughly half of its pre-war Mosquito fleet capability. That's not a fleet that's been eliminated. That's a fleet that's been wounded, but still very much alive. This is exactly why the American response has needed to be so unconventional, combining tools that were never originally designed to work together in quite this way. Take the A-10 Warthog, for example. This is a Cold War-era aircraft, originally built for one purpose: hunting and destroying tanks with a massive rotary cannon capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. It's slow compared to modern fighter jets. It's not stealthy. It wasn't designed with naval warfare in mind at all. And yet, American commanders have specifically deployed A-10s to hunt Iranian fast attack boats, flying low enough over the water that pilots can visually confirm the difference between an innocent fishing boat and an armed IRGC speedboat before ever firing a shot. The aircraft's famous titanium armor around the cockpit, originally built to survive ground fire over tank battlefields, now lets these pilots operate in an environment that would force more fragile aircraft to turn back. Apache attack helicopters have joined this effort too, carrying Hellfire missiles with a range of roughly 5 miles, used to intercept drones and strike boats detected by onboard sensors. Together, these older platforms have become an unlikely but remarkably effective part of the naval blockade strategy. And speaking of the blockade, this is where the economic pressure campaign gets very real, very fast. Just over a week ago, the United States reimposed a full blockade on Iranian ports, blocking any vessel from transiting the strait if its destination is an Iranian harbor. On the same day American forces struck the island network, they also launched a Hellfire missile directly into the smokestack of an empty oil tanker that had ignored repeated warnings while heading toward one of Iran's main export terminals. The ship was disabled, not sunk. That distinction matters enormously. This wasn't about destroying one vessel. It was about sending an unmistakable message to every other tanker captain in the region. The blockade is real, and it will be enforced from the air if necessary. The results have been dramatic. Before this conflict escalated, roughly 110 ships passed through the strait every single day. Since the blockade and the surrounding military campaign began, that number has collapsed to a small fraction of normal levels. Now, here's the honest, professional reality that too many headlines skip over. You cannot completely eliminate the mosquito fleet threat from the air alone. These small boats hide along Iran's southern coastline, tucked into sea caves and among countless small islands and coral reefs, the exact same geography that protected small boat operations during the original Tanker War 4 decades ago. You can't bomb a cave you don't know is hiding a boat until that boat actually launches. And once 20 speedboats converge on a tanker from multiple directions at high speed, the window to stop them before they reach their target is incredibly narrow. So while these strikes are clearly degrading Iran's capability, they are not eliminating it. And Iran's own naval leadership has said, publicly and directly, that they intend to stay in the fight. They still have boats. They still have drones. And they've made clear they're willing to keep absorbing American strikes because they judge their remaining ability to threaten the strait as more valuable than the cost of continued losses. Quick pause here, because I want to check in with you. If this breakdown is giving you a clearer picture than what you've seen anywhere else, do me a favor and share this with someone who's been trying to understand what's actually happening in the Gulf right now. That single share genuinely helps this reach more people who need to see it. All right, let's keep going, because the human cost of this conflict has been escalating just as fast as the technology behind it. Over the past 2 weeks, this fight has grown far beyond a contest over islands and shipping lanes. It's become something with real, mounting casualties on both sides. The Pentagon has confirmed that close to 100 American service members have suffered injuries since the beginning of this month, most described as minor, though reporting suggests the military has been slow to fully disclose the scope of those injuries as the numbers have climbed. And just in the past several days, that toll turned far more serious. 3 American service members were killed. In response, the president publicly warned that Iran would, in his words, pay for those deaths, a warning that arrived hours before another wave of American airstrikes hit Iranian territory, specifically targeting bridges and electrical infrastructure in the southern province that runs along the strait. This marks 9 straight days of continuous American bombing, following the total collapse of peace talks between Washington and Tehran over a dispute tied to an agreement on how the Strait of Hormuz itself should be governed. Iran hasn't been sitting quietly through any of this. Its retaliation has spread well beyond its own borders, reaching directly into countries that host American military installations. Kuwait intercepted what officials described as hostile targets heading toward its territory. Air raid sirens sounded across Bahrain as the country braced for incoming threats. Jordan confirmed it, shot down Iranian missiles aimed at its territory as well. All 3 of these nations host U.S. forces, and Iran has been deliberately applying pressure against each of them as a direct response to the American campaign against its coastline and islands. Washington's answer to all of this hasn't been to pull back, it's been to reinforce. Additional fighter jets are being surged into the region. Dozens of American aerial refueling tankers have arrived in Israel over recent days, with Israeli sources indicating more are still on the way. Every visible signal points toward an American military posture that is preparing for more, not preparing to stand down. And even with all of that pressure stacking up on both sides, Iran hasn't stopped fighting for control of the water itself. Just this week, Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed it struck 2 tankers it accused of illegally trying to pass through the strait. British maritime security officials confirmed that a vessel was hit by an unidentified projectile not far from the coast of Oman, forcing the crew to abandon ship. No major environmental damage has been reported so far, but the message is unmistakable. Iran is still actively contesting passage through the strait, even while the physical infrastructure it built to support that fight continues taking direct hits from American forces. So here's the question worth sitting with for a moment. If Iran is visibly, measurably losing control of this waterway, why does it keep fighting this hard to hold on to it? The answer comes down to something every military strategist understands deeply. Deterrence isn't just about winning. Sometimes it's about making the cost of an enemy's victory so high that they eventually decide it isn't worth continuing. Iran's most senior naval commander has already been killed in this conflict. Its island fortress network has been struck repeatedly, including in broad daylight. Its submarine repair capability at its most important naval base has been hit by autonomous weapons without a single American life placed at risk in the process. Its command centers, radar systems, and missile launch sites have all been targeted within the same tight windows of time, sometimes hours apart. And the financial pressure is staggering too. Estimates suggest the ongoing blockade is costing Iran somewhere around $500 million a day. That's not a number any economy can absorb indefinitely, especially one already strained by years of sanctions and isolation. And yet, despite every one of these blows, Iran keeps going. It keeps closing off sections of the strait where it still can. It keeps launching missiles and drones at American positions across 3 separate host nations. It keeps claiming successful strikes on tankers moving through the waterway. That kind of persistence, even while visibly weakened, tells you something important about how Tehran is currently weighing its options. It suggests Iranian leadership has concluded that even a badly degraded ability to threaten the world's most important shipping route is still worth more, strategically, than the mounting cost of continuing to absorb American strikes. Now zoom all the way out for a second, because the consequences of this narrow strip of water reach economies that have nothing directly to do with Iran, the United States, or any of their immediate neighbors. Before this conflict began, roughly 1/5 to 1/4 of all seaborne oil traded across the entire planet passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Japan draws close to 90% of its crude oil from Gulf sources. South Korea, India, and China all depend heavily on the same route. When daily ship traffic through that strait collapses, and it has collapsed dramatically, insurance premiums spike, shipping costs rise, oil prices climb, and that pressure doesn't stay contained to the Middle East. It travels down every link in the global supply chain, all the way from a Gulf oil producer to the price displayed at a gas station on the other side of the world, in a country that may not even know where the Strait of Hormuz is. Here's the thing people often miss about how this kind of pressure actually works. The shipping industry doesn't need vessels to actually sink in order to stop coming. It just needs insurance underwriters to decide the risk has become too high to justify. And right now, based on everything happening across this campaign, that's exactly the judgment they've reached. Whether the combined weight of everything the United States has done, the island strikes, the autonomous drone attacks, the low-altitude boat hunting, the enforced blockade, eventually pushes that risk assessment back down to a level shipping companies are comfortable with. Again, that's the central open question hanging over this entire conflict right now. And given how fast things have moved over just the past 2 weeks, that answer is likely to keep changing quickly. Before we wrap this up, I want to bring you back to where we started, because I think it's worth appreciating just how strange and unprecedented this entire situation really is. A conflict that, on the surface, looks like it's about a handful of tiny, forgettable islands, has turned into one of the most technologically advanced naval campaigns in modern military history. Autonomous drones making combat decisions with murky human oversight. Cold War-era tank hunters repurposed to chase speedboats across open water. A blockade enforced not through mass destruction, but through precise, targeted strikes designed to send a message rather than simply cause casualties. And underneath all of that technology and strategy sits a much older, much simpler truth. Whoever controls this narrow stretch of water holds enormous power over the entire global economy. That's been true for decades. It was true when Iran first seized those 3 islands back in 1971. It's true today, as the United States systematically dismantles the infrastructure Iran built on top of them. What happens next is genuinely difficult to predict. Iran has shown again and again throughout this conflict that it's willing to keep absorbing serious losses rather than surrender its grip on the strait. The United States has shown just as clearly that it's willing to escalate its response with tools that didn't even exist in a combat role a few short years ago. Somewhere between those 2 positions, a resolution will eventually emerge, but based on everything that's happened just in the last 2 weeks alone, it's not going to happen quietly, and it's not going to happen slowly. If there's one thing worth remembering from everything we've covered here, it's this. The next major turning point in global oil prices and shipping costs and the balance of power across an entire region might not come from a massive battlefield or a dramatic declaration of war. It might come from a handful of tiny islands most people couldn't find on a map, and the machines, some flown by humans, some flying themselves, currently deciding their fate in real time. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture than anything else you've seen on this topic, that's exactly what this channel is here to do. Subscribe if you want to stay ahead of where this story goes next, and drop a comment letting me know what you think happens from here. Does Iran eventually back down, or does this keep escalating? I read every single comment, so don't be shy. Stay close, because this situation is moving fast, and the next update is going to matter just as much as everything we just covered.